Welcome to Tejal KHANDELWAL Study Center. Let's revise Machiavelli together. Machiavelli is one of the most infamous thinkers and also known as devil's advocate or disciple. Despite being practiced in the real world of politics, he has been criticized. And the reason is that he speaks about power as an important variable in political analysis, unlike anyone before him. He also makes a separation of ethics and politics. Aristotle also did a separation, but it was very rudimentary in nature. It is Machiavelli who makes this separation very forceful. He was much ahead of his times, and he is also known as the greatest theoretician of real politics. That is, politics of the real, rather than as the idealist or the philosopher advocate it to be. That is, what ought to be. His focus was not on what ought to be, but what is being practiced. Let's move towards the works of Machiavelli. The most important work or the greatest contribution of Machiavelli is The Prince. In The Prince, which is not a work of a theory of the state or of the government or of the constitution. In fact, it is a manual or an advisory which talks about how to ways or means to a king on how to acquire power, how to seize power, how to maintain power. That's why it talks about power politics. And Machiavelli was aiming, or his key objective in this regard has been to unify the state of Italy, because Italy was divided. Unlike, states like Spain or France, which were ruled under one monarch. So that's why, because of this kind of politics, he always says that the key and the most important duty of the prince is to maintain or preservation of the security of the subjects or the citizens. That's why even Machiavellianism has been synonymously looked at like power politics. That term has been associated, evils of the power politics has been synonymously associated with the term Machiavellianism. Thus, Prince is a very important advisory or manual which should be read by anyone who wants to enter into the realm of the real world of politics and who seek to be a key politician. The second important work is the discourses. What differentiates? Some scholars say there is a differentiation between the prince and the discourses. And some others says that no, the subject matter of both books or both works is similar or in continuity with few changes. Like in The Prince, he focuses on monarchy as the form of government. In discourses, he is highlighting about the republican form of government or how a revolutionary regime can be kept in power, which means it is about virtuous citizens who people who participate and keep the government alive. On the other hand, in Prince, he is focusing more on a monarchical form of government. Another key work is The Art of War. You would have also heard The Art of War by Sun Tzu. But Machiavelli's Art of War talks about military strategies and the importance of training in arms. He focuses to keep a national army of citizens rather than having a private army of mercenaries. Because a national army will have the feeling and sentiment of loyalty and patriotism when they are fighting for the security of the states. This will ensure victory through the prince rather than mercenary soldiers who might change their stand. Like we see in the Russian context, there were also mercenary soldiers which had been adopted in the Russia-Ukraine war. And there was a huge controversy regarding these mercenary soldiers. So yes, Machiavelli remains relevant and his advice of having a nationalized army within the art of war remains relevant until today. Let's move towards the methods of Machiavelli. Machiavelli's approach has been historical. A historical approach does not mean analysis of historical facts or evidence. A historical approach means logically analyzing the events and learning from the experiences of the past, which means Machiavelli says that human problems and human nature remains common across all times and ages because history is cyclical in nature, so it will always repeat itself. So he uses the historical approach to learn from the past, analyze the events from the past, which enables us to analyze the events in the present and also predict the future. His method is also empirical in nature, which means it has been located in the present times that he was living. Why? Because what has been the method of Plato? Plato's method is more idealistic because he speaks of some universal idea which is there in the mind rather than an eternal idea which is different from the sensory world. But Machiavelli is talking of things around him, the present circumstances in which he was living. So, though his method is historical, it is also empirical in nature and it marks an important stage in the evolution of the discipline. His method was also practical. Why his method is practical is because he is not talking of any theory of ideal state or a theory of the constitution or talking of anything which is only more relevant in theoretical terms, but he is talking about the practicality of the reality of the politics, which means located in the actual working of the machinery of the state. We also say that his method was inductive because he looked at the particular circumstances and drew broad generalizations in order to analyze events, predict events for the future as well as his present. So there is a key debate, okay, and Lasky mentions that Machiavelli is a child of his times, or any thinker or every thinker is a child of his times. What do we understand by the term every thinker is a child of his times? Which means the thought process of that particular thinker has been shaped by the circumstances of that time. That does not imply that a thinker is relevant or narrowly located and narrowly dated, which means whatever he is talking will be relevant only to his times and not relevant for the future. So, Lasky's perspective of analyzing Machiavelli, as he says, is Machiavelli has been a child of his times. And why so? Because he takes firstly the historical circumstances and context. He analyzes logically the evidence of the past to understand the problems of the present and the future. It is said the whole of Renaissance is in Machiavelli. What has been the Renaissance? The Renaissance is an era which was talking of even the revival of the ancient times, some good values of the ancient time. And because the Middle Ages of Europe were emphasizing more on the works of God rather than the contribution of man. So it was Renaissance in Europe which led to a completely new and dynamic social order, which means it was a period of transition in Europe which led to eventually or paved the path for the modern age. And what were the circumstances in this Renaissance period which influenced the thought process of Machiavelli and how it is linked to the various ideas or concepts that Machiavelli is talking about. So the first and most important is the spirit of humanism. What is the idea of the spirit of humanism? What is humanism? Humanism says that the work of human or man is at the center of everything. It is not God which is at the center of everything, which means we have to have dignity for man. We have to appreciate the achievements of man. Humanism is about keeping human at the center of everything. And when we keep human at the center of everything, we make the individual more important, maybe than the society, than the community, or than even the religion. So, from the spirit of humanism, the spirit of individual being at the center of all analysis rises. So, it is not the authority of religion or church which is important, but it is the individual which becomes more important for everything. There was also the beginning of the modern state. Why do we say that Renaissance led to beginning of the modern state? Is because the nation state, the concept of nation state came into practice the concept of nation state comes from Europe, and it led to secular modern nation state, which means the political authority and the religious authority will be divided from this era. So the church will not dominate the public affairs. Church should restrict itself to the matters of the spirit of the conscience and the private affair of an individual, and not guide the king on how the king should act, or not dictate the terms on the political authority. So who will be the supreme authority and who will gain sovereignty is the state or the political authority, in whom the political authority is vested. So beginning of the modern state, a secular state, a nation state, also later leads to the theory of or the concept of sovereignty, which emerges or crystallizes more in the works of Hobbes. The geographical discoveries, which means the scientific explorations also that came. And scientific explorations were done by whom? They were also done by individuals. Individuals in the search of bringing reason into modern light. Also the invention of printing, which led to new ideas being dispersed across the entire European continent and even other parts of the world. So the Renaissance, which establishes a new and dynamic social order, leads to shaping the thought process of Machiavelli. Brian Nelson says that Machiavelli is a transitional thinker. What does Brian Nelson mean when he says Machiavelli is a transitional thinker? Which means his thoughts are still tied to the past, and he is bringing in some threads, or he is starting some of the new threads of the modern times. But he is not the one who has crystallized or worked on all the modern thoughts that emerge. So he is like on the crossroad of medievalism and modernism. That's what Brian Nelson is saying. And that is to an extent a good analysis of Machiavelli's thoughts and his contribution. So he is, even though he had spoken of state in the modern sense, but a complete feature or the vital feature of state, that is sovereignty, emerged elaborately in the works of Hobbes. So is Machiavelli genuinely modern? So yes, he gives political thoughts or theory, or his contribution is important for the modern age. The rise of the modern secular nation state also contributes. Power also becomes a key variable, unlike the idealist or even thinkers like Aristotle, who speak of power more in a rudimentary sense, unlike Machiavelli. And the evils of power politics also begins with Machiavellianism's analysis of making power as a key variable and the unscrupulous method that he is advising to the ruler, the statesman in the work The Prince. Also, the modern view of human nature. What is the modern view of human nature? The modern view of human nature is more pessimistic rather than making human as an ethical individual, which was there earlier, which means it says that man is selfish, man is self-centric in nature. So this kind of account of human nature begins with whom? Machiavelli. And then we will see how Machiavelli's pessimistic account of human nature is different from the Hobbesian account of human nature. So if we look at the political thought of Machiavelli, he talks of from the view of the ruler and not the ruled, which means he is more concerned of how the responsibility and the onus that lies on the ruler, and he should not be worrying too much about the masses, or he is not worrying about the perspective of masses. He always says it is only the preservation of the citizens that should be the key morality of success or the morality of success from which a ruler can be judged. Alright? Now, so he talks of the preservation of the state rather than the excellence of the constitution or the theory of the ideal state. So Machiavelli is not concerned about that. Purpose of politics is to preserve and increase what? Political power. How to acquire power, how to maintain it, how to seize it. Now, what about his view of human nature? According to him, individual is a political animal. But we also see Aristotle says that individual is a political animal. Then how is Machiavelli differing from Aristotle? Because Aristotle's perspective is the innate sociability of human being. But when we say that Machiavelli says that man is or individual is a political animal, he means that the idea of politics or the key concept of politics, that is power, is ingrained in human nature. But here also there is a small catch, which means when he says that power or acquisition of power is innate value of human being, it is more in the context of the traits of elite, which means the elite seek to acquire power. They seek to maintain reputation. They want to have superiority over others. They have the desire to control. And this distinguishes from Machiavelli's perspective and Nietzsche's perspective or Hobbesian perspective, because Machiavelli associates this virtue or the element of power more with the elites or traits of elite and not of the masses. But Hobbes says every individual has an inherent lust for power, and Machiavelli says these are traits of the elites. So he talks about universal egoism. What is universal egoism? Which means every individual is selfish. Every individual is self-centric. Now, being selfish or being self-centric, which means focusing on yourself, is different than the idea of having lust or thirst for power. So Machiavelli says yes, power or acquisition of power is a key trait of the elite, not of every individual, but very much every individual being selfish and egoistic has been spoken by Machiavelli. Now, attitude towards religion. This is a very important contribution because from here will begin the idea of a secular modern nation state. So what is guiding Machiavelli's thought? In the Middle Ages, if we see, so there have been a church which was dominating not only over the private affairs. See, religion should be a matter of private life. Why? Because it is the relation with God, between the relation between man and God. It should not be the element which should dominate what are the decisions that are being taken in the public sphere or the public life. So Machiavelli says that church's domination in the political affairs have made people more divided, have made Italy more divided, and that's why Italy has not been able to consolidate itself. That is because of the authority of the church. That's why church has to be separated. This is the context which shapes his attitude towards religion. So, he is anti-church. He is anti-clergy because of the problems they have caused in Italy. But he is not anti-religion. He looks at religion from a utilitarian perspective, which means according to him, religion does have utility in the state. To the extent that he says that if religion did not exist, it will have to be invented so that there could be maintenance within the state. The maintenance of some virtues, the maintenance of fear, the maintenance of obedience of law. So religion for him is important. It serves a utility. Okay. Now, so he is not doing philosophical contemplation. We already saw that he is different from the idealist like Plato. Because for Plato, what is the key question? for Plato, the key question is what is a good life? Which means he talks always of a universal idea. He talks of an eternal idea that exists in the mind, and reality is the shadow of ideas. But Machiavelli is not in the context of, ideas. He says we all have to exist in the circumstances around us. We have to talk about the reality of the life, what is happening in practice. That's why he is not worried of the question of good life, which idealists were associated, and then in that context. So he is not questioning anything, which means religion, which will be like a philosophical contemplation, also give some kind of values for how to live a good life. Machiavelli is not concerned about that. Okay. So we have linked religion and good life, which means even religion provides us some kind of morality for good life, for which who is not concerned? Machiavelli is not concerned. Now, for him, what is the role of religion then in life? Okay, for him, first he says, religion inculcates certain virtue. What are these virtues? So, religion will bring humility in mankind. Why it will bring humility in mankind? Because man will say that there is some force which is above me, which guides me, which is superior than me, and I am not the superior. So, when there is, man will feel that he is little lesser than God. Okay, which means that supreme force is more bigger. It can shape more than man himself. So, when an individual becomes humble, or when he acquires humility, he will behave in a more moral way towards others. Okay. However, do you think only being humble is a good virtue for the preservation of the state? Because state is concerned on the unity, state is concerned on security of its subjects. So he says certain virtues of religion are good because it humbles an individual. But to run the state, we also need other virtues like courage, like bravery, like cunningness, which religion does not give. So for that, we will have to inculcate some different kind of morality in the public life of the individual. Now, which we will see is when we will be talking about the dual morality of Machiavelli. Second thing he say, religion brings in the doctrine of rewards and punishment. What is the doctrine of rewards and punishment? Which means religion says that if you do good, good will happen to you. If you do bad, then you will go to hell. So this brings fear in individual. The individual to seek good rewards from the divine or godly forces will do good things. Otherwise, the individual will do bad. Then this serves as utility for the state. Why? Because it brings the element of fear. When you have fear, you will act nicely towards others. There will be some morality which will be governing your action and conduct towards other individuals, which is important even for maintenance of laws within the state. Okay. So he says, but also religion has a negative role because it leads to division in the state. That was obvious in the times of Italy. The papal authority was, or the church was, leading to a lot of division within the state. So he says, yes, it also leads to division in unity of state. So see, even today we see how religion is used by the elites to divide people, to seek garner votes. So communalism. So, these things, his attitude or his prediction of the role of religion can be linked even in modern times. Then, so he says, yes, fear of religion or the inculcation of fear is very, very important for obedience of law and for bringing in good human conduct. However, what is very much important is to separate the sphere of religion restricted to the private life of the citizen, and church also should only control that much. Church should not interfere in the political affairs. That is the work of the king and the prince. And that's why the concept of secularism in politics, separation of the religion and politics, comes from Machiavelli. So it is in fact all these things that shape the separation or secularism. Is this understood? Fine. Now let's move towards what he talks about advice to the prince. What is the advice that he is giving to the prince? So we already know in the work The Prince, he is giving advice, and he says that my entire idea is not to have creation of an academic treatise or neither any value-oriented political philosophy like Plato or to an extent Aristotle. He is concerned on the art of the government. When we say art of the government or the maintenance of or the concept of statecraft, which means how power is being managed, okay, which says that Machiavelli is pragmatic in character. He is located in the reality, in the practical politics. Okay, so his advice to the prince is also not to focus on philosophical contemplation. Okay, his advice to the prince is that you should be located in what is happening in real life and work things according to that. So, he talks about the techniques of the fundamental principles of statecraft. Statecraft is management of power in public affairs. Okay. Now, what are the virtues of a successful ruler? So, he says the ruler firstly should have, there is a dual morality in public life. And what is this dual morality? Which means morality of an individual in private sphere is different from morality that a king will have in the public sphere, which means you should not judge the king from the virtues of the private, which means maybe in a private life doing something may be unethical or immoral, but it may not be in public life, because everything has to be judged from morality of success. What is this morality of success according to Machiavelli? That is the preservation of the subjects and the citizens. So king has to be judged only if he is successful, everything is good. If he is not successful in preservation of his citizens, then he has failed. That's why Machiavelli will never focus on the what? He will never focus on the means. He will only focus on the end. So this dual morality will only again be related to focusing on what? What does he say? So any means can be adopted if the ends are what we aim to do. Fine. He says a king should be both lion and fox, which means the king has to be brave as well as he should have the techniques of manipulation. He should be cunning. He should do tactical behavior. He should be strategic in thinking. And that's what even today we say, how if we look at, the NSAs of India, how they are guiding the particular prince or the Indian Prime Minister, tactical behavior, right? So, king has to be both. So, where we have to use force, we use force. Where we have to use cunningness and tactical and strategic behavior, we do that also. He says there has to be judicious use of law and physical force. What is this judicious use? Which means you don't have to use too much of force. The king should not use too much of violence until when it is needed. Okay. And we'll also talk of how the usage of violence has to happen. Then he says the king should be free from emotional disturbances, which means his entire life has to be very disciplined. He should not lead into, pleasure-seeking activities all the time, right? So he should be free from emotional disturbances so that he can focus on his task. Okay. Next is king should always possess a nationalized army, which means of the people, of the citizens, and not mercenary or private armies, okay, which are bought. He says the king should not focus on the property of the subjects and the women of subjects. So man can forget, the killing of his father, but he will not forget if his property is taken or if his woman is touched. So king should not touch the woman of his subjects, okay, because that is associated with the respect. And if you break respect of an individual, that is his partner, that is the woman and the property, which means he will develop hatred, and the feeling of hatred will lead to revenge from the king. That will create instability within the state. So these are things or qualities that are needed, virtues of successful ruler. What else according to him is important for the king to do? So how usage of violence has to happen? Okay. So he says that firstly, what is violence? Violence is a tool of exercising power, which means it has to be used only when needed, right? And how to use it for maximum effectiveness? So you should use it only when firstly absolutely necessary. You should use it quickly and mercilessly, which means you cannot delay. मारना है तो एक ही बार में मार लो, धीरे धीरे मत मारो. Then minimize resistance, which means don't allow for any kind of scope of resistance, all right? And the king should not kill, somebody else should kill on the behalf of the king. Why? Because this will create hatred and the feeling of revenge. So that's how violence has to be used. He also talks about usage of non-violence. Like violence is a tool of exercising power, according to Machiavelli, non-violence is also a tool of exercising power. And what is the way of exercising of non-violence? And that is manipulation. So manipulation means what? Which means you shape the mind of your subjects. How you will shape mind of your subjects? Which means you are creating some different kind of feelings towards the king. So you create an element of dependency of the subjects towards the king. And how you will do? So you will give some gifts, you will give some donations, and that has to be done over a long period of time. So today, how we are getting after elections, whatever benefits that are being offered, they continue to keep promising to give us gifts and everything after election. So it is that only. It always has to be done what? Slowly, gradually, over a long period of time, dependency has to be created. But violence has to be used, on the other hand, quickly and mercilessly. So he says double standards of morality. So what is important for Machiavelli? End is important, means are not important. Okay. And so he says might is rights, ends justifies means. Very important phrase. You should never forget. So he talks of two different standards. When we say double standard, which means morality is something which is more, we can't have double standard. Then there is no concept of morality. But for him, there have to be two different standards. One is the morality through which the rulers are judged, and one through which the citizens, which means he distinguishes between the public and the private sphere of life. Separate public and private sphere of morality. Okay, why? Because existence of the state. What? That is the preservation of the subjects. So we say that his contribution towards the concept of statecraft. Statecraft is management of power. Okay, right? So it is a very unique contribution because no one before him talks like about statecraft or power management or power as key and prime variable. People have spoken in rudimentary sense. The more forceful emphasis on power has been given by whom? By Machiavelli in the practical politics. It is also controversial because he talks about many negative ways, usage of violence, unscrupulous way, wicked ways, tactical ways, strategic ways that the prince should adopt. So that's why he is also criticized because of the controversial methods that because of the unscrupulous methods that he is advising the prince to do. So it is a unique contribution as well as controversial contribution. Now, so art and set of techniques for managing state affairs. Power management in short is statecraft. For this, even diplomacy, which means how you engage with your neighbors, your other powers, that is also important. What is the role of statesman to maintain statecraft? So he should be a builder of both state as well as societal order. He should inculcate law, which is a guidance for both moral as well as civic virtues for the citizen. He also talks of building military power for the state, and he also talks about how usage of compassion is more beneficial than cruelty. Okay, but yes, we also have to do cruelty or violence when needed. Fine. Now, on corruption. So with respect to corruption, he is giving a very broad meaning. For him, what is corruption? License to do anything wrong is corruption. Violence is also a means of corruption. Inequities of power and wealth is also a form of corruption. Lack of peace and justice also within the state is corruption. So all these aspects, corruption is not only usage of, public office for private means, but all these kind of negative externalities within the state for Machiavelli is corruption. Okay. So he says extraordinary measures have to be adopted by the prince. And he says that corruption, which means he says the political psychology of the citizens, which means the human nature, how they are thinking, they very much shape our institutions. So political psychology is strongly linked with the working of political institutions. So we see how today, people are adopting any means to come to power. So the recent controversy of the Pooja Khedkar case also puts before us that, any means are adopted by individuals in order to achieve their desired ends. Okay, so that's why corruption. Now, theory of fortune. So, does he talk about fortune, the role of fortune? See, there are two ways of looking at fortune. One, fortune, which is in the concept of Christianity, is it is a divine sanction, and no individual can change his destiny or fortune. But what does Machiavelli say? He says that man, if he is not prepared enough, he will also be beaten by fortune. But he brings the element of role of an individual in his destiny, which means he says fortune is like allegory of a river he gives, which means we know that river can cause floods. So fortune is also like a river. When you know that river can cause destruction, what is your duty to protect yourself from these floods? What should you have done at an individual level? You should at an individual level have prepared well for combating floods, which people fail to do. And then fortune beats them. So he says, man can be a maker of his destiny. Man can bring change in his life. But he has to do that kind of actions also. Only then man will be able to change things how he or she desires them to be. Okay. So he says he uses the allegory of the river to explain the theory of fortune. So he says with creative power and assertiveness and being well prepared in advance anticipation, man can change his fortune, shape his destiny. Nature of the state. So how should be the state? So for him, state should be two types. One is a republican form of government can be established where there are very highly spirited people, which means they are not corrupt. They have immense patriotism, loyalty, feeling of nationalism towards the state. Wahan pe republican form of government is good. But if people are corrupt, okay, then what should be there? We should have a very strong ruler. Which is a stronger ruler or one ruler who rules the state? So that is in the form of monarchy. But he is very much against aristocracy and nobility. Why? Because few rulers who are only looking at their vested interest, they will ruin the state. Okay. Second thing about the state, he says, state should always expand. That is the doctrine of aggrandizement. If the state does not expand its boundaries, it will perish. But we know, what does Plato say? Plato says, state is always self-sufficient, which means if state is expanding, there is some disease in the state, which means it has to depend on others. But a self-reliant state will not expand. It will remain within its own confines and stay self-happy, which means happy on its own. Okay, but on the other hand, since Machiavellianism is evils of power politics, he focuses on expansion. Okay, so expansion of a state and its boundaries are important. That is what he's talking of the state. All right. So this is about Machiavelli. We will discuss the questions on the stipulated date within the schedule. Thank you so much.